All right, today we're diving into a presentation by EMF specialist Cyril Burke. And he makes this really compelling case that there's this invisible force out there that's hitting our health and our environment hard. And it all starts right inside our own homes. So Cyril kicks things off with something you've probably noticed yourself, even if you haven't really thought about it. You know, the whole bug splatter thing on your windshield. Or maybe the lack of it these days. He uses this really simple, everyday image to pull us into a much, much bigger conversation about a huge, invisible change happening in our environment. And that really gets to the core of his argument, this idea of an unseen influence at work. He's basically saying, hey, it's not just the obvious stuff like chemicals and pesticides. He thinks there's another force out there, and it's hitting the smallest, most vulnerable creatures in our ecosystem first. And here's where he makes a pretty startling connection. He's linking that decline in insects and birds directly to electromagnetic fields, EMFs. And he's not just pulling this out of thin air. He points to a whopping 119 peer-reviewed studies to back up his claim that the EMF levels in our environment have just shot past what's scientifically proven to be safe for them. Okay, so if there's all this science, like the speaker claims, you gotta wonder, right? How are the legal and financial worlds reacting to this? And that brings us to what he calls the case against EMF. To really build this case, he points to this landmark moment in Australian legal history, and he frames it as a question for the audience. Who do you think was the first person to actually win a workers' comp case for electromagnetic radiation poisoning? Well, the answer is just dripping with irony. It was a scientist, Dr. Alexander MacDonald, who worked for the CSIRO. And get this, CSIRO is the very organization that developed Wi-Fi in Australia in the first place. So the main takeaway here is that one of their own scientists successfully argued that he was being poisoned by it at work. And according to the speaker, what happened next was like a set of dominoes falling. So check this out. February 2013, Dr. MacDonald wins his case. And then boom, almost immediately, the big global insurance companies like Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re start to react. By 2015, just 2 years later, they introduced something called Exclusion 32. And what that does is it basically yanks all insurance coverage for any illness caused by non-ionizing radiation. We're talking Wi-Fi, cell phones, Bluetooth, the whole shebang. And just to show you how seriously they were taking this, check out this quote he shares from the insurance giant Swiss Re. They apparently called it an off-the-leash risk. And their own internal studies, they supposedly showed it was going to be even worse than lead and asbestos, combined. Okay, so we've gone from the big world of global insurance, and now the presentation brings this whole issue right back home, literally into our living rooms. And that, of course, leads to the big question. How much of this stuff is too much? The speaker uses this to set up a comparison that really makes these invisible numbers feel, well, real. So here's the comparison he lays out, and it's pretty stark. On one side, you've got the radiation you get from holding your cell phone to your head, and he says the safety limit for that is something like 6 minutes a day. But then, on the other side, he shows a real-world measurement from a house that's right across from a hidden cell tower, and the exposure level is actually higher. But it's not for 6 minutes. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, it's not just about signals coming from outside. The presentation introduces this other idea called dirty power. He describes it as this high-frequency noise or static that's basically piggybacking on your normal electrical wiring. And the claim is that this noise doesn't just stay in the wires. It radiates out from your walls like a radio wave. And then he makes this really wild claim that it was originally developed by the Department of Defense to poison specific people. So to put a number on it, he shows what a typical measurement of this dirty power looks like in a regular, unfiltered home. He uses this special meter and gets a reading of over 2,000 units. He calls that level diabolical. But then he shows you the after. After installing a whole house filter, which is the solution he proposes, that number just plummets. It goes from over 2,000 all the way down to 42. I mean, that's a massive drop. Next, the talk zooms in on one very specific frequency, 60 gigahertz. The claim here is that regulators just made this frequency free and unlicensed, basically for all our smart connect devices to use. But here's the alarming part he presents. At that exact frequency, oxygen molecules supposedly absorb almost 100% of the energy. And he alleges that this makes it harder for our hemoglobin to grab and carry oxygen around our bodies. Okay, so after laying out all these potential problems, The presentation shifts gears. It moves from the what's wrong to what can we do about it. And this last part is all about creating what he calls a sanctuary in your own home. And his number one piece of advice? Focus. He argues that the single most important room in your entire world is the bedroom. Why? Simple. That's where your body is supposed to rest, repair, and heal every single night. So here's his action plan, laid out in 4 clear steps. First, you gotta measure your environment so you actually know what you're dealing with. Second, shield the bedroom. He talks about using special paints and fabrics. Third, filter the power in your house to clean up that dirty electricity. And finally, number 4 is all about adapting your own habits and how you use your tech. And that last point is a big one, because not everything costs a ton of money or needs a professional installer. He lists off a bunch of super simple things pretty much anyone can do right away. Things like, just turning off the Wi-Fi on your router and plugging in with an Ethernet cable, or going into your phone settings and turning off the 5G capability. And a huge one, never ever sleep with your phone right next to your bed. He even throws out this cool little experiment. Just go to your breaker box and shut off all the power to your house for 3 nights in a row, and just see. See how you sleep, see how you feel. And that really brings us to the final thought of the entire presentation. It doesn't end with a neat little answer. Instead, he leaves his audience with a really provocative question to think about. After showing all these potential sources of EMF in a modern home, from the wiring in the walls to the smart meters to the towers outside, he just leaves you with this one question. Are we actually building our homes to be sick in?